what my company does. We fix what is wrong with supercomputers today. In the meantime of developing all of this, I was called in once by the Department of Defense, and they had a particular project, and that project involved building something and designing something that would be a very, very secure system to track things that weren't where they're supposed to be. And so after the concept was fully developed, I presented that. DoD liked it. The Department of State was supposed to take over. We were awarded a grant, provided that we spin out that part of the technology of my prior company. We did. We were awarded the grant, and then the grant got taken away because the Department of State was defunded by the prior president, as we all know. And so that caused a little bit of a problem, but nevertheless, that technology is available to me. And in my new company, we make use of it to make sure that supercomputers not only scale better, but they also are secure. So, because ultimately, if you've got a supercomputer, spend $100 million, you don't want your adversaries make use of it. Right? So that's one of the reasons why we combine both of it, and that's why, of course, we are not only following HPC and AI and machine learning, but also the security required to make them available to those only that are authorized to do that. And that's about it.
Super. Skip.
Hi everybody, I'm Skip Sanzeri, so co-founder, COO, and board chairman of QSecure. And we took on the challenge of looking at the problem, the threat of quantum computers. Sort of got into that as an adult, as I was thinking about quantum and quantum mechanics and theoretical physics. I'm not trained there at all. But if you spend any time looking at the quantum world, you realize it's crazy weird. Things like entanglement, interference, superposition, things that we don't understand at the physical level, because we have our five senses. But down at that level, it's wild. So about 6-7 years ago, I started seeing companies that were building quantum computers. I did a little bit of research and was looking at people that were in this business, D-Wave, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Amazon. And I saw all these big companies sort of stepping in, and then I started to understand why we need quantum computers. The fact is our CMOS, our computers we use today, that we all use, the zeros and ones, those are running out of steam. So what's happening is they're trying to fit so much on these chips that now there's a lot of heat being generated, electrons are interfering with each other, and these are running out of the efficiency gains we knew is Moore's law, right? Those things with double in capacity and speed and half in price every 18 months, that's over now. Quantum computing is another form of compute that will add to what we have. It's not going to replace what we have, but it's going to add to it because it calculates things differently. And as we're making progress, it's going to handle big problems, and I would call these multivariate problems. Things like genomics, protein folding, weather prediction, optimization and logistics, material science, chemistry, AI, things that have a lot of variables. Quantum is really good at that as it comes of age. It's not there yet, but it's moving, and these big companies in this country and other countries are investing a lot of money in this. But the first problem that needs to be solved, well before those computers come online to help humanity, is the problem of cybersecurity, because if those come online, and if we don't have new encryption that will protect us against those threats, then we're going to have a lot of problems in the U.S. and with allies and really the Western world. The reason is quantum computers, while good at multivariate, they also do things like global minimums. And a lot of our encryption at the public key level, what I mean by that is, anytime you're on the internet, it's public key encryption. We'll go into more of that later, because Brad's got a lot of questions there. But that encryption is based on one single mathematical equation called factoring prime numbers. And that single, if that can get solved, quantum's really good at that. If it gets solved by quantum, the door is open to all of the information traveling over the internet. And if somebody gets to that before it's protected, it's an existential problem. It could really be an issue. So anyway, QSecure is here to help with that, and I'll explain more later. But yeah, Brad, I'll let you start off with some questions.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds to me like there's a material shift that's happening. And I've been in cybersecurity for, a couple of decades, and everybody's been fine with public key infrastructure, and we've all used it, and that's all fine. But now, there's a significant threat. So, expand a little bit more upon kind of what that threat is. I guess, maybe let's start with what quantum is and what it's not, and then just to kind of refresh the audience, and then I guess we'll start diving into some of the security implications, and then we'll look at some of the different industries and some of the impact of those industries. So maybe just kind of an overview of, I guess, what quantum is, and just the nature of it. Obviously, it's a system, it's a computer, but even that's probably not doing it justice.
You want me to go?
Yeah, you go first, Doug.
So, a traditional computer will be made out of registers that each contain bits, binary digits. And as the word implies, they are binary. They can be either 1 or 0, but nothing in between and not at the same time, right? So therefore, you can easily do the math. A 4-bit register will have a total of 2 to the power of 4 statuses that it can be in at any given point in time, right? 2 to the power of 4, 16, right? So 16 status is all it can do. Now, if your status space is much bigger, you can make the word bigger and longer, and it will get to a point at which it's getting difficult and expensive, right? Today, most processors, even what you have in your cell phone, are 64-bit processors, 2 to the power of 64, right? That's a relatively large space that can be spanned by just a single register doing some math on something. But it's not infinite and it's not big enough. And as Skip said, the math that we use for encryption today is predicated on the veracity and validity of factorizing large numbers as factors of prime numbers. And as we all know, prime numbers are not that easy to find. And there's no good algorithm that easily identifies them. And if you take 2 prime numbers and multiply them, and then multiply them with yet another thing, could be a coefficient, could be whatever, then this number is very, very difficult to identify as a product of 2 primes, right? Now, if we look at a quantum computer is fundamentally different. A quantum computer, and I don't know if you heard about Schrödinger's cat, but the cat in the coffin is dead and alive at the same time, right? So translate that into the value of a qubit, not a bit, a qubit, and you will see that it spans by itself a much larger solution space, because the quantum bit, the qubit, is in both states at the same time. And that may sound very confusing, but it is. And it only reveals the true contents by the time you measure it. You can measure it with something else that is entangled with it, quantum entanglement. Einstein called it spooky action over a distance. But the matter of the fact is that if you've got something entangled, let's say the spin of an electron, this one can be up only, this one can be down only. As soon as you wiggle this, the other one will flip immediately, right? So the matter of the fact is, if you've got a 100-bit quantum computer, you can represent pretty much all statuses the entire universe is in at that time. So this is how powerful a quantum computer is. Therefore, if you've got a 100-qubit quantum computer, it is theoretically conceivable that if you take the output value from creating a factor, basically a product of 2 prime numbers, even if you try to conceal it with multiplying with yet another coefficient, that a quantum computer could theoretically crack that in no time. The problem that we are all facing as not only physicists, but also those people building quantum computers, is that the quantum computer will give you all of the results at the same time. And now you're going to pick which one is the correct one. And there can be many, many correct ones. There's only a certain probability that the outcome is the one you're looking for. And that is part of the problem, which is why we have, at this point in time, quantum computers for special purpose applications, but there's no there's no general purpose quantum computer. There's no operating system for quantum computers yet. There's no compiler, and there are no application software pieces available that you can buy, because we're still in the phase of evaluating what to do with quantum computers and the quantum registers, and how to make them work over time, because the quantum state will decay. So let's say you have not completely controlled the temperature of the quantum register. The quantum bits will flip. If you haven't cooled them with the laser enough, they will flip. If you have not figured out how to do the entanglement to read out the value properly, you may get a wrong result because it's not properly entangled. Or another case is you have two qubits that are unintentionally entangled, which you didn't want, and you don't know about it. All of a sudden your result becomes something that is less than correct, right? So all of these things are, all of them are in need of figuring out and being solved before we have a realistic quantum computer for special purpose applications and then general purpose applications. But the theoretical capability of quantum computers to find solutions to the problem of factorials of prime numbers, that exists. And because of the factorials of prime numbers making up everything behind what we know today as a functioning set of encryption standards, we now have to figure out how much of a quantum computer threat there is on the existing standards, right? And that's really the background of it. So binary digits versus quantum bits, and binary digits with deterministic outcomes versus quantum bits, which are a little bit more difficult to maintain and to read out than a traditional computer that is based on binary digits, and our inability to comprehend what really goes on behind the facade, right? And that makes the challenge of figuring out what the impact of quantum computers is, both numerically and probabilistically, on all of the encryption standards that we've developed so far and we're using.
Let me add to what Axel has said. So here's a physicist and here's a finance marketing person that thinks he's technical. I'm not. I like to use analogies. So if you think of quantum, a couple ways you can think about it is, if you were going to traverse a maze, you would start here, you go up here, you go left, whoops, there's a wall, go right, oh, there's an opening, go up to the next one, you go right, whoops, gotta stop, go left, oh, I can go that way now. Think of a quantum computer as traversing everything at the same time. So it flows through the entire maze and you have your result. Now it's probabilistic, as Axel was saying, but just keep that idea in mind. On the entanglement piece, as he was saying, spooky action at a distance, Einstein could not get his head around this, but he was wrong. He didn't believe it could happen, but he was wrong. But when you entangle two particles, you create a relationship between those. You could separate those by universes. And when you reverse spin on one, instantly across the universe, the other reverses spin. It cuts through space-time. It's not speed of light bound. This is the craziness that happens at the quantum level. Now you take those and move those down to the system that Axel's describing. The way that you work a quantum computer is you want to line all these qubits up and entangle them, and you want to run a process, but they're very wispy. It's very hard to control these qubits, whether it's 50, 100, 400, 1,000, it doesn't matter. Very hard, because every single environmental aspect can mess that up. Noise and heat and radiation and vibration can mess all that up, where these things just jumble and they go away. They're like scared. If there's anything wrong, they just dissipate and you can't work it. But if you can hold them together and you can keep that with these qubits, you can run that process. The power is exponential. Now let's understand what that is. So you think about exponential. You remember that game you played as a kid? Somebody said, I'll give you, John, $25,000 right now, or I'll give you a penny doubled every day for 30 days. What are you going to take? And the obvious thing is, I'll take 25K. It's cash on hand. I got it right now. 25, if you take that penny and you double it for 30 days, $5.5 million. Why is that? 2 to the first, 2 to the second, 2 to the third, 2 to the fourth. Give you the idea of the power of a quantum computer. If you're at 2 to the 300th, that's one quantum computer with 300 qubits and one process. That process number is larger than all of the atoms in the entire universe. One quantum computer. So you're starting to see this will provide power humanity can't deal with. We've never dealt in those numbers. You can't even put 2 to the 300th into Google and find out what that number is. It'll give you the E at the end, because it won't even calculate it for you. What about 2 to the 1000th, or Shor's algorithm, which is the algorithm that Axel was alluding to, that says that quantum can break RSA 2480 or factoring? That's 4100 qubits. So if you go to a dinner party and somebody walks up to you and says, "Hey Jay, how many qubits does it take to break RSA?" And you go, "Oh, that's a great question. Why do you ask?" It's 2n plus 3. So 2 times the key length, which is 2048 on RSA, is 4096, plus 3 is 4099. That's a big computer. That's 2 to the 4099. Our minds are blown. There is no system on the planet that can even calculate how big that number is. But what we do know, mathematically, is that breaks all of the encryption that we have out there today. And this is why NIST and the NSA 7 years ago started a program to say we have to change algorithms, because the RSA stuff we use, well, it's been around since the late 70s. We're using encryption from the 70s. The only thing we did was we increased the key sizes. So it's a bigger key, like the number Axel's talking about, a bigger factorial, but it's still the same structure from late 70s. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is how we need to change that encryption. You've got to switch it out, because if we stay with this, we will get run over, and there's a train wreck coming that if we don't switch out, and the feds know this, and commercials starting to know that if we don't do this now, we have some real problems on our hands. And I say life is the way we know it in the US will change. Back to Brad for more questions.
So you mentioned the government. So I've heard that the federal government has put out some edict that says by, is it 2025, all government agencies need to be quantum secure? Is that right? 2025?
Yeah. So in December of last year, Biden signed into law HR 7535. It's called the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, and it says that all federal government now has to change cryptography to post-quantum. They know they can't do it as soon as 2025, but they have to start the upgrade process. What they're doing now is they're forcing all federal government to start assessing. But the message is, federal government, you got to start changing, because we know that this encryption is going down. And again, it's the entire world, it's the globe. This is a $1 trillion upgrade. This will be the largest upgrade cycle in human history, way bigger than Y2K, because internet wasn't built for security, folks. Internet was built for communication. Was not. Security was the afterthought. Like, once e-commerce came around, they go, "Oh yeah, probably should secure that stuff because there's money changing hands now." And it was the afterthought, and it was built in. Now it's worked so far. No qualms for the most part. But now it's a mandate. It's compliance. There's no choice, and the world's going this way. Go ahead. Sorry. Right.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, what can a normal average business do? We've all basically used this standard. We've been using this standard for decades and decades and decades. Many people would say, "Oh, it's not now, it's not here, it's not a problem." And also, I think it's pretty common that people say if they don't understand something, they just ignore it. I think that's a very common human condition, right? And it's not affecting me. And until it affects them, but when it does, it's going to be so catastrophic, and not just to that person, but to society as we know it. What can people, either people in the room, what can companies or corporations begin to do? Because it almost feels like even for them, mañana, they don't really care. Again, it's not going to affect them. I'm busy. Whatever the excuse might be, we don't have funding, maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, and it's one of those things that people never get to. I guess the first question is, what's the wake-up call? And it feels like it's an earthquake, but there's no quantum earthquake, because when that happens, we're done. What can businesses begin to do, and how can even the people in the room, what can they bring back to their companies to say, we really need to start a task force or something? Just what are your recommendations? Axel?
Yeah, I think we have to look back a little bit of history and see that unfortunately most businesses and people haven't been very reactive to updates that are necessary, right? So a lot of businesses still use old and outdated, completely deprecated security measures like DES. And they've been deprecated for close to 10 years now. And I still see DES encrypted stuff. And that can be cracked with a laptop today. You don't need even a supercomputer for it, right? There's in fact a cracking software out there on not even the dark web, on the regular web that you can download to crack anything that is DES. The same is true for Wi-Fi. For the first 2-3 generations of Wi-Fi, the WPA keys can be cracked with a laptop in less than 30 seconds, right? The problem is that people haven't really reacted to this, and I think that's largely due to the fact that they don't understand security in the first place, which is bad. And you know, one posture could be, let's at least have a look at where we are vulnerable. Let's assess where we are vulnerable to attacks. And the matter of the fact is, even that hasn't been done by most enterprises, let alone by private people, right? So theoretically, we could make a transition to AES and ban everything that's below AES 256. That would be a first step. Is that quantum secure? No, of course it's not, but it's better than anything that can be cracked with a laptop within less than 30 seconds, right? And so I think the reluctance of people to change anything is directly related to the threat that they perceive. And they perceive the threat to be non-existent. And I think that's an educational problem. It's not a procedural problem, it's not a tech problem. I had in fact developed something that was not based on AES, that was not easily crackable even by quantum computers in 2016. And it took forever for me to get that funded, right? But I think the perceived threat is something that doesn't penetrate the security posture that's needed today, and people and companies just ignore it. They're like, we haven't been hacked yet, so who cares? Right? And that's exactly the wrong attitude, because for me, in fact, I wanted to come back to the maze, fantastic example, right? The other example that's always been used is, of course, the traveling salesman, right? Those are the two, but even if you try to explain those to laypersons, they will say, I don't know what it has to do with security, and my stuff is encrypted. And so then I asked them, to what algorithm, to what key, what's your key strength? How do you keep the keys, right? And that's the next rat's nest, because most people have a very easy guessable password, right? And so that is a step that needs to be taken as well, because even if you've got a quantum safe and secure algorithm, but if the password can be guessed in no time, then the entire algorithm becomes useless, right? Another thing that most companies don't think about is how the algorithm is implemented. And I've proven that in 2016 as well. The matter of the fact is that you can build hardware that is quantum secure today. What most people don't get when they talk about quantum secure encryption is what to deal with the keys. And the best way to deal with keys is not to have keys at all. And let me get to another analogy, because yours was so good, and I might have to take that.
Please,
I'm talking
write
about
a check every time you use it.
Exactly.
Licensing.
If a bank manager is held up because he has the key to the vault, then that is dangerous to the bank manager, and it will ultimately at some point in time lead to the fact that either they take the key or he opens the vault, right? That puts the money at risk. Now, if the bank manager doesn't have the key, he can't open the vault, whether he wants or not. And that's a posture that we should all take, and that was part of what I developed for the 2016 security processor for the military and the Department of State. That very simply, no entity that was software or that was a user had access to any of the primary keys. And that primary key could now be used to encrypt something that had secondary or tertiary keys, so that they could either be exchanged after being authenticated or after being validated, such that there was authenticatable access rights associated to that, right? But the matter of the fact is the primary keys shouldn't be known to anybody, because if the primary keys are known, they can be exploited. And I don't know if you remember the Intel and AMD processor exploits, where data was left in the cache, right? That is an implementation issue. You can have the best algorithm on the planet, but if your processor executes the algorithm in software, and the processor's cache controller has a lazy flush policy, then the contents of the key, or the contents of the memory, including the key, might still be in the cache at a time at which it shouldn't. So if you are a developer for software, you can always force the processor to dump the memory, including the cache. And if you do that, and usually that's done automatically if you run into a trap, which is something that is an unexpected execution instruction or an unexpected result, you can force the processor to do that and reveal the keys because the cache controller hasn't deleted them on time, right? And those are implementation issues in hardware that should have been avoided in the first place and weren't, because the hardware people didn't talk to the software people, that didn't talk to the firmware people, that didn't talk to the software people, right? And that's something you will find over and over again, and that makes the security posture even harder for everybody else, because now you say, hey, I've got an improved algorithm and it's quantum secure, and nevertheless somebody stole my keys. Well, guess why? Because the implementation of the algorithm wasn't as expected and wasn't as secure as it could have been made, right? Those are all things the expert have to convey, but they have to convey it in a form to people that understand, that makes it understandable for the lay person, that if they don't change their security posture, they are vulnerable to, and we're not even talking quantum computer attacks. We're talking to any kind of attacks. Quantum computer attacks will just make it faster and more effective and more efficient, right? But there is no fundamental change in how the attack can occur and how it can be successful.
So what I'm hearing is better cyber hygiene.
Yes, better education, better cyber hygiene, absolutely, yes.
Okay. And Skip, what can companies do? Like, how do they begin? How do we make it easy for them, or how do we give them a safe place? So like, they might not know, and it feels like, I mean, they should know, and somebody probably knows, but make them feel comfortable enough to say, you might not know, or you might not realize that you need better cyber hygiene, or you need to at least upgrade your basic encryption algorithms, and that's okay, but you need to start. How do we kind of get that word out and get at least people to upgrade?
Yeah, I mean, it is education at this point. Everybody thinks it's good enough. They're good enough now, right? And the argument you'll get back from your CISOs and your security people is, we got it covered, don't worry about it. And I say there are two types of people out there: those that have been hacked and those that don't admit they've been hacked. Right? That's it. Everything's getting hacked, and it will get hacked, and we see it all the time. I mean, I remember reading, I think it was Department of Justice, it was about 3 months ago, stopped a ring that had been hacking a lot of U.S. companies, and they were taking a lot of credit. DOJ was like, we got these folks, we stopped them, it's awesome. And then there was this little thing at the end that said, and the hackers had been in the systems for 20 years.
Oh boy.
And I'm like, that's the problem. Not the fact you stopped them, but what did they get over 20 years? Everything, right? And so the problem is pretty tough because it's human nature, as Brad was saying. Yeah, we're busy, we're good, I got things to work on. DigiCert came out with a survey yesterday, not a week ago, not a year ago, yesterday, that said 76% of organizations are not ready for post-quantum upgrade, but they know they need it. And the biggest excuse was they're working on other things. So people know about it. It's starting to change out there because now quantum's been out in the news more. The threat's been out in the news more. They've seen that China's spending $15 billion on a single quantum computer to break PKI. 15 billion, 3,000 to 4,000 people working on this because they stored about 27% of the world's data. And that is a treasure trove of data. That's everything. And it can be everything from listening devices that might exist in Huawei or ZTE. It can be listening devices that sit outside fiber that comes in from the ocean. They can have other areas where they listen in and they could go in and directly steal. But the point is, with all that data, if they can get if they have the ability to decrypt that data, you got everything. TikTok. We as humans, will trade privacy for convenience all day long. Bet you didn't know that most of the major VPN providers backed by China. So every free VPN you're on, China, CCP. We don't know that though, right? So it's not a matter of now whether or not people are going to get hacked or we're going to lose data or it's going to end up somebody else's servers. It's not the case anymore. It's going to happen. The key is how do we get ourselves in order? And it's going to take pushing. So when your CEOs and your CISOs say, we're good, we got this, you have to say, no, we're not. We're not good. And I'll give you one more story that happened 2 days ago, not 2 years ago, and this is what I was trying to just get started to tell you, and I told Brad earlier. We found out 2 days ago, MEM Computing out of San Diego has come up with an A6 chip specifically that took care of this von Neumann problem, and they were able to scale and crack 300-bit encryption. So RSA is 2048, this is 300. They were able to crack 300-bit encryption in 1 minute and 22 seconds with this new A6 chip. And they said, we have a linear relationship to 2048, not exponential. They did this and they said they could do it linearly, which means that if you can crack 300 in 1 minute 22, you crack 2048 in 6.2 times, 6 minutes. This white paper came out. This has lit our world up at QSecure. We've sent it into our 3-letter agencies, and they, almost to a T, NSA, CIA, FBI said, oh my God, is this real? This is 2 days ago. So our problem isn't even a quantum problem anymore. Our problem is we're working on old encryption. We need to switch to the new stuff that's not factoring now, because if what San Diego and MEM Computing did is true, and right now it's being peer reviewed and it's standing up pretty strong, that means that all the encryption we use is going down, and it's going down as soon as somebody gets, we don't have to wait 5 years for a quantum computer now. So at QSecure, as we started, we started out with the quantum problem, and people would say, oh, well, that's years away, it doesn't matter, right? I'll get to it when I get to it, right? No, it's game on now, and if we don't do it fast, it's game over. And so now you're gonna see major DoD agencies scrambling now, because this is a 10-year upgrade cycle. Even if you started today, talking about earlier, what Axel was talking about, people don't know what encryption they have. You got encryption on hardware, you got it on firmware, you got it on software, you got it on communications, and most organizations don't even know what they have, because it comes, when you buy a system, sometimes encryption's already in there, you don't even know what it is, right? So you've got to start looking at it, assessing it. None of it's post-quantum, and none of it's capable of handling, at least at the communications level. Now, AES 256 is data at rest, so data that's sitting. AES 256 is sort of known, and NIST and NSA said, okay, kind of good enough against quantum, but public key is the factoring. That's the data in transit. That's moving, right? That is all standard PKI, and with the strengths from 512 to 2048, it's over. So we have got to move super fast, and if your organizations are smart, you'll start testing some post-quantum stuff. Now, sales pitch, hyperbolic sales pitch here from Q-Secure. So I warned you all, so you can't say, you know that guy in Q-Secure, he tried to sell us a bunch of stuff. I warned you ahead of time. So you guys on. Point is, we have deployable algorithms from NIST right now that can go right in the enterprise and solve that right now. And by the way, sit on top of what you have. You don't have to change it. So that you don't have to do any, it's really just it's not a forklift upgrade, it's just put it on top and you're good. You got that communication piece solved. And that's why we're doing contracts with DoD and banking and everybody else. But it's got to happen now.
So what industries would you say are most exposed to not doing these upgrades? I mean, financial comes to mind, but what others would you say are the most top 3, top 5, maybe top 7?
I mean, everybody's exposed because everybody uses the same standards. However, the ones that'll move first will be federal because now they have to. It's law, right? They got it. And then it's going to be highly regulated because they're watching what federal says. Because banking, healthcare, energy is watching right behind federal going, you know what, that's coming our way next, we better get ready. Those are the ones that'll move first, but everybody's impacted. We did a study with the Hudson Institute. One single quantum attack on the banking system, federal banking, $2 trillion in damage, one attack. That would kill our economy for 3 years. One attack. I mean, all the stuff going on globally, Middle East, you know, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, you know, there's a lot. We think Colonial Pipeline was a probe. That was a probe to see how is the U.S. going to respond. We're going to shut that energy down the East Coast. Let's see what happens. And it's now the resilience. It's not whether or not you can stop it. It's how quickly are you back online? How quickly can you get back up and running? You know, FGM Caesars, right? We're going to shut you down for a week. Let's see how quickly you guys can get back online. You know, and what's the cost, and how do people respond? What's the effect on the stock price, right? Yeah, it's all testing now.
So, I mean, can industries, would it make them, I guess, more comfortable? Sounds a little strange, but if industries were to band together to collaborate on upgrading, so that like we're all going to do this thing at the same time because we are the financial industry and we're connected to the insurance industry, and so we're going to all do it at the same time, so we're going to push it all down and everybody's going to get it at the same time, so we'll all lift together. Would that help industries to migrate faster, do you think? Or does collaboration even make sense, or is it just people just have to start?
You want to tackle that? So I'll probably.
So I think this again goes back to the notion that everybody's secure enough and doesn't have to do anything. Right? I don't know if you remember, but the web was initially all HTTP. Right? HTTPS came as soon as people started using credit cards and buying stuff on the internet. That hasn't been that long ago. And the unwillingness of a lot of participants to implement HTTPS is something that persists. And I think it's going to be very difficult to tell people, hey, HTTPS, because that's a challenge protocol. That's even easier to crack, right? I mean, that's, once we do that for breakfast, but HPC, you know, part of HPC is, of course, cryptanalysis, right? So the ASIC you're mentioning is predicated on an idea that is actually over 100 years old, that there is an algorithm to determine what is a prime number. And yes, that algorithm exists and it creates lots of numbers. Not all of them are prime numbers, but all of those that it finds are candidates for prime numbers. And that can be done in an ASIC in no time. It's no big deal, right? So we're not even talking about quantum resilience. We're talking about the fact that the existing infrastructure isn't set up to withstand any kind of large-scale attacks, let alone large-scale attacks by quantum computers. And the matter of the fact is that people think they are secure when they're not. And one of the biggest holdouts of the entire conversion from HTTP to HTTPS was the entire banking system, right? And now if you look at what they are deploying, on one hand, they are still using mainframes with the 40, 50-year-old architecture, and they put, I don't want to single out a single router manufacturer, but they put Cisco and Juniper routers and switches to communicate over the wide area network, which is by definition unsecured. And what they are doing is, because in the higher levels of security, Cisco doesn't play with Juniper, they dial it down to the lowest common denominator, right? And so that's what they still do as of today. And I see it as a very, very difficult approach to make them aware of the fact that they're running an insecure and highly vulnerable network over the open public internet, and to convince them to do something new. So if we want to do that, we would have to have those solutions available in hardware that's a teeny tiny box that they plug in here and there and be done, right? Because if I tell them that they need to add software to a mainframe where the software was last maintained in the late 70s, written by a COBOL programmer who has long retired, right? I can tell you what the answer from the banks will be there. Well, we can't. Even if we wanted to do it, we can't. That guy retired and nobody understands the code, right? Ain't gonna happen, right? It's not gonna happen. So again, it has to be something they plug in that is not required to be certified by any banking oversight committee, other than saying, yes, this is secure enough. But if I have to force them to rewrite code that is 30, 40, 50 years old, because they've always used it on a mainframe, why do you think IBM still makes money, right? Not because mainframes are so much better than entire racks of servers. No, it's because the software is there and they can't change. They can't, right? And that is a part of the problem that we would, as an industry, have to address and say, okay, we can't change the mainframe. You've got your preferred supplier of routers and switches, and the other one has a different supplier of router and switches, and you use the same mainframe. But here's this box we put on both sides. You're good, right? That's what we would have to do to get them to adopt a stance that is different and that is making them secure, because I can tell you, software change isn't possible, and they will not change. And Cisco isn't much better in terms of internet security either. When you look at VPNs, I don't know, anybody ever played with a Cisco VPN router? You want to kill somebody after you did that, believe me. Right? It is only going to happen if this is going to be a teeny tiny black box that plugs in. Nobody frightens it when they, when they look for it, and it is not inventoried. It just has to be there and function. Right? That's the way it has to happen. Any other way, I don't think it's going to work.
I agree. And Brad, for your question, is it an industry standards type thing? We expect some standards to come out, but we don't see commercial driving those. We don't see coalitions coming together. Security is still an afterthought. Let's face it. I mean, you think about security, and think about the casinos again. They outsourced a lot of their folks, their IT folks. That was one of the people that gave out the password. Security is kind of just thought as something that you kind of have to do, I guess. Maybe throw some security, but it's not a strategic initiative. And that's changing, though. At the board level, it's starting to change, because now you've got folks like the SEC starting to say, well, we're going to start holding you guys responsible. There's talk of moving towards someday criminal. If you don't keep your cyber hygiene up and you can't prove it, and you have your company take a hit, shareholder value, revenues, IP, disruption, you're going to be held responsible. In fact, I was just texting with one of our key investors today about that folks are going to start having to pay the price Because I think to date it's been like, oh, it's got hacked, and everybody gets hacked. You know, we lost our stuff. Everybody loses their stuff. You know, it's no big deal. I mean, look at the folks that have been hacked over the years, the big hacks at Targets, the Yahoos, you know, the energy, like Colonial, the casinos recently, multiple government institutions, right? I mean, there's hacks that a few years ago with 50 million federal records went out with all of the clearances and everything else. It's a mess, right? And like I said, there's people that admit to getting hacked and ones that don't, but everybody gets hacked. So I think it's going to take, the federal compliance is a good start, and that's going to kind of force it. And then, but I think then Axel's right. You have to have something that's easy to install. Our system is like that. It's just simple. It doesn't take a lot of effort. There's very little risk. Put it in, sits on top. It's going to take something like that because you're right. People don't change. You know, you think about it, rip and replace or tear those things out. I'm not going to do it.
So it's more more federal regulation or regulation in general and enforced regulation. And it seems like it's the conversation around quantum and quantum security it's not really the conversation. The conversation is just security, period. And maybe using quantum as a catalyst to wake people up to say, oh, by the way, that big bad thing's coming, but you still, at minimum, need to get yourself up to the standard of probably 10 years ago, which you're not.
That's right. I think you're absolutely nailing it, because ultimately, if you look at it, the attacks by quantum computers are not fundamentally different. It's just they're more effective and efficient, right? You can now brute force it, right? And that's why I'm saying the issue still is today that we're using passwords. Because if you're using a password, well, guess what? I can guarantee you 90% of all companies that you know, they have a system administrator, and the system administrator has every single password for every device in an unsecured, unsalted, unencrypted Excel spreadsheet.
No.
I can guarantee you
Excel
that.
spreadsheet.
Guaranteed that, right? So what's the easy thing to do? Even if you've got a quantum secure and safe system, what you do is, it's called social engineering, right? It's not even phishing. You find out who the system administrator is, and then you figure out, okay, what are his potential vulnerabilities, right? So usually, system administrator, you try out the dog's name, the wife's name, the girlfriend's name, whatever friend's name, right? And then add a year to it, right? And that's usually what your password is for the sysadmin. Believe it or not, that's how they do it. So you're now in the system, and you have now access to the password list, which means you're into everything. But there's one thing that's even worse, and that's never discussed. I don't know if you remember the SolarWinds hack. That was booked away as, who cares? So I'm telling you that was the worst attack ever. And why is that the case? SolarWinds is a piece of software that allows you to administer servers. Do a firmware upgrade, and a server is built like a PC, except for it has another mini PC in it that is there for administrative purposes, right? So with this so-called BMC, the baseboard management controller, you can reset it. You can update the firmware of the server, and you can do a whole bunch of other things. Most importantly, none of that is logged. So if I'm in a network, I can reset any server, I can put malicious firmware into my heart's content because I know how to get in there. And once I do that, I have malicious firmware that I can authenticate because, hey, I'm in the BMC now. I can authenticate the firmware update as malicious as I want it to be, and I can install it, and I can shut down the server, restart it. It now runs on malicious firmware, right? SolarWinds was used for 80% of all servers ever deployed in data centers. Ever. So if I hack SolarWinds, guess what? I'm in everything I want to be in for the rest of my life. And that had really nothing to do with quantum compute. And with a quantum attack, it was figuring out how the system works. Now imagine this was only one attack, and maybe they didn't disseminate it, and maybe they didn't fully exploit it. But if I now take a much more powerful computer, including a quantum computer, I can guarantee you I can get into the SolarWinds and the successors of the SolarWinds, into all of the administrative software that makes all of these servers hum and tick. And that is the problem. And that's because we still use passwords for everything, right? If we get rid of passwords, and if we get rid of the need to put everything in an Excel spreadsheet so somebody can access it, printing out isn't any better, but that's the way it's done, right? I mean, you're laughing, but that's the way that's how companies do it. Ask your employer, ask your sysadmin how he does it. Let him show it, and I can guarantee you it's an Excel spreadsheet, right? And whether they sort it by IP address or symbolic name, it doesn't matter, right? If I have access to it, I'm in. And I'm in into anything and everything they want, and I want. Right? That's part of the problem. And the more computational resources I have, particularly with a quantum computer, the more I can try this on a brute force method, right? So if I know, well, okay, so it's the first name of the girlfriend plus the 4-digit something, well, guess what? I'll try them out, all of them. Who the hell cares? Takes me no time, even on a laptop, right? Even if we extend the length of it. But once I have a more powerful computer, I can just brute force it my way. And that is a problem. And that has not been solved.
How do you know the name of the girlfriend?
Social
Social
media. Yeah,
engineering.
exactly.
Social engineering.
That's what
Yeah,
Instagram does.
social, exactly.
Right?
So you just guess them all.
Or
You
guess
have so
them
much
all.
power.
Exactly. If you've got
Every female name.
If you've got a quantum computer in the background, yes, you can theoretically do that, but then any good software should say you have 3 tries after that 10-minute pause.
Oh,
Then you've got 3 tries, 100-minute pause, right?
Mhm.
So that's how you stem that, but the matter of the fact is, very few pieces of hardware and software implement this kind of stuff, right? And that's of course an oversight of the programmers and the hardware developers and the people making the operating systems. Why? Because security is an afterthought. And that is the real disaster here, right? Does a quantum computer make it easier to crack? Oh, hell yes, right? There's no doubt about that, because then I don't even have to guess the entire thing anymore. I just say, okay, I know it starts with this.
So, in summary, we're kind of wrapped up here at the top of the hour. It sounds like, we moved the conversation from quantum and spoke about quantum. We spoke about quantum security, and we have a level of awareness of that. But in a way, it seems like, while important, that's a semi-distant goal, because it really just comes down to this moment: data hygiene, security hygiene, and upgrading from systems that are archaic and just aren't using good encryption. And you've got to be thinking about quantum and quantum security at some point in the future. It should be in your security roadmap. But the call of the day is just upgrade what you have and start best practices that actually make sense, that map to today, and not something that is years gone by. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, federal government, plus or minus, right? We all have our thoughts on federal government. But I think they do get it right, and they started the program of looking at new encryption 7 years ago. And because they knew. They know at levels what's being developed out there. They knew the quantum threat. They know how much is being spent. For folks that have clearances, they have a lot more information than I do, but I've seen enough. We know what's happening, let alone the ASICS thing out of San Diego. That's all brand new. But they knew this was coming, so they're pushing as fast as they can. And again, federal government pushing fast is 7 years, right? It's not like when we have companies, we do things in 7 days, they do it in 7 years. But nonetheless, they know. And this idea of moving into something new, the fact is, again, our digital footprints grow every day. We do nothing but make data. We're like data making machines now, all of us, right? I mean, if somebody had the right tools, they could see we're all in the room together right now. Why is it? Because we have those cell phones. They know it, right? And they know everything else about us, whether it's social or whether it's tracking where we go with Waze or what sites we go to on the web or how much we order from, what we order from Amazon. It doesn't matter. They have it all. So now the key is, how are we going to start fixing some of that? And the new algorithms so far have stood up. Now a couple have been cracked. And we know that they're not going to be perfect, but a term that I'll put out there now that you can think about is something called cryptographic agility. And so again, as we talk through this evening, and we know that there's all this cryptography out there in an enterprise, it's everywhere. But guess what? You can't change it. It's locked in, it's in this system, it's tied into that. It's not maneuverable, but with cryptographic agility, the idea is you can change your cryptography. You can change your key strings. So it's the idea of rising up a layer and saying, I want this cryptography for those IoT devices. I want this for my edge devices, my laptops, my phones, for my constituents. I want this for my heavy duty servers. I want this for my satellites. And by the way, NIST isn't perfect. The contest wasn't perfect. If one of those goes down, Kyber, Sabre, Macaleese, NTRU, these are the names they put on these algorithms. If they go down or they get, if something happens to those, you gotta be able to switch. Remember that resilience I talked about? Switch it out to something new instantly, get that new crypto deployed, because now you're good. Right now, crypto is static. You can't do anything with it. All you can do is know it's there. So this is a whole new way of thinking, but the good news is, it's being forced, government's behind it, major industries are starting to get on board, and there'll be more and more news about it. You guys will hear about it more and more. And it's now time, and if you think about all this digital stuff that's 30, 40 years old, that's not forever. We're having a hard time handling this technology, folks. But now at least we're giving it a try. But it's essential at this point that we do this, because again, you know, there's a lot of globalization going on by certain adversary countries, and we don't want to be on the receiving end of that.
Excellent. Closing thoughts.
I think it's all been said. For the most part, it's training, it's education, it's awareness, it's technology, and it's overcoming the inertia of not doing anything. Because again, I've seen companies encrypting today with DES, something that was deprecated 10, 12 years ago. When?
Back in the 90s, literally in the 90s.
It was developed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was broke. It was, Single DES was hacked in the 90s.
It was hacked in the 90s. So it's been deprecated for 30 years.
Yeah.
And people still use it to encrypt and decrypt, right? And when I talk to those people, it's like, well, but, okay. So we have to overcome that inertia and say, I'm sorry, but no, this is not appropriate anymore. Use something modern. It doesn't necessarily have to be cryptographically resistant and resilient against quantum computers yet, but make sure you have the ability to change out the hardware or the software that does the encryption. And that's something we have to educate people on, and we have to break that lack of inertia. It must stop.
Well, thank you both for your time. I'm just going to quickly ask, just because we have a small group, if anybody has any questions.
I have a question. Not everything is worth encrypting. In your example, Skip, somebody could use, find out from our cell phones we're all together. I don't care. What good is that information?
Yeah.
What does it matter?
Yeah.
But for a company and their financial stuff, of course, you got to encrypt that.
It depends, John.
Yeah.
For instance, it depends who's got the data. To some people, nobody cares that we're together. Other people might care. They might say, hey, there's this physicist we've been tracking here, this guy named Axel, who makes chips for a living, and there's this other guy from QSecure that's been out there very vocally, you know, on Forbes and everything else, talking about this problem. Those two guys are together. What are they doing together, right? I want to know more about these two guys and what they have planned. It all depends on the data. A lot of data is junk, let's face it. Probably 80% is junk. But there could be 20% that has value to people, and you don't know. I mean, you know, the idea is that we all are valuing privacy, right? And we all want our data to stay private, whether it's of interest or not to people. The problem is we don't know what people could do with it. lot of things people can do with it. Yeah.
And we don't know, that's
We
right.
don't know.
So you're better off encrypting everything.
Right, so I encrypt everything. Let me give an example that highlights it a little bit more. I got a neighbor who has this, shredder that makes teeny tiny shreds, right?
Zigzag.
And because it was so expensive, he uses on the 1 or 2 pages a month that need to be shredded, right? So now you've got this little bit of stuff you can easily reconstruct. You use software. You first scan the entire shreds.
Oh, really?
You
It'll
use
put it back
software, and you
together?
can now put back together, right?
Oh,
But if
my
you shred everything,
Yeah.
including the spam mail you get, guess what? That's so much shit now. It's a lot harder to put back together, right? So I told him, stop shredding just 2-3 pages a month.
Shred
everything, everything. Same for your data. Whether your data is usable to anybody or not, it doesn't matter. If you encrypt it, it becomes this other piece of inaccessible stuff to somebody who has just tried to do a drive-by attack. Just encrypt it all. Doesn't matter. All.
Yeah, so there are startups out there developing passwordless authentication, where the server and the client exchange information, and in milliseconds,
Yes.
they get into the system and passwords are never stored.
That's
So
right.
those can't be hacked. So why can't there be technologies of that nature developed that deal with the quantum computer?
Okay, so thanks for bringing that up, because I keep hearing passwordless, and in reality they're using even more passwords, and they have a protocol that is completely vulnerable. It's not even a challenge protocol, right? So we've cracked that stuff within seconds.
Okay, I'll talk to you after, but I'll tell you one where I believe you're not correct, but we'll talk about it.
There are plenty of companies that put this stuff in unsalted, unhashed, unencrypted databases on the server of this service, right? So for as long as you have any access to it, and even if you just retrieve your password and you inject, it's basically SQL injection, malicious SQL injection. That's what you supply with your password request. They're so badly secured. We had one white hat hacker, bam, literally, took him seconds. It was in. And he retrieved not only our passwords, others as well. Right? So that's why this passwordless, cloud-based stuff is even worse than you putting it in an Excel spreadsheet.
And Paul, what you're talking about is identity management, and a lot needs to happen there. There's got to be new methods, because you think about it, good identity management is that I know you're Paul because I can see you and you're right in front of me. But, with AI now, and, obviously ChatGPT brought, by the way, it was only 3 months after ChatGPT came out that Worm GPT came out, which is the hacker's version of ChatGPT on the dark web that says, hi, guess what? This is what you use for hacking. So every technology is good and bad. But the point is, there will be a time very quickly where if you're not in front of me, Paul, you could call me, you could be on email, you could be on video, and I would not be able to prove it's you. And so somehow identity has to get to you and stay with you and be part of you. So that's where the bio comes in, the face, the fingerprint, all that kind of stuff, tied in with your privacy to somehow make sure that we know it's you. Because now with deepfakes, audio, video, even ChatGPT used for email, right? The emails you used to get on phishing were kind of poorly written, and you could tell, oh, that's not even, right? Not anymore. No, ChatGPT will make a perfect email now, right? And you won't know that. So this is the hard part of identity management. And the AI stuff's coming up faster than we can handle. You can't regulate policy fast enough to deal with that stuff. So it is a Wild West, but you're right. We got to do something about identity management.
Yeah. And to that same point, the issue very simply is, how do we authenticate ourselves in the future, right? And it has to be something that you are and that you do, something that only you know, right? Because everything else can be reconstructed. Who you are, yes, there are plenty of ways that people can try to authenticate who you are. But the matter of the fact is that's not good enough. That can be replicated very well in any of the AI tools today, right? particularly video, doesn't matter. All of that kind of stuff is easily replicable. So it has to have another element to it that is not who you are, but also what you know and nobody else knows about you. Right?
One quick question. What do you think about the zero knowledge proof for using the password and identity management? ZK proofs?
Pardon me?
Zero knowledge proof? Zero knowledge proof.
Yeah. It's yet another one of those buzzwords that has made the rounds, has made a lot of people rich and a whole lot of other people a lot poorer. And so zero knowledge proof by itself is not a bad idea, right? It's an approach to prove authentic behavior, authentic people, authentic groups. The problem is that the implementation so far has not been very good. And in fact, the way it's implemented today doesn't lend itself to improved security over what a secure vault could do for passwords that are primary passwords that never are in need of being disclosed. Right? You can look up my patents. It's all out there. The patents have been issued. If you want to look at what the military liked about what we did, it's all in the patents. Right?
Super. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.